I first have to say a few words of admiration to all of you. This is probably the only conference in past around 20 years since I have been attending conferences to have the same number of participants at the beginning and at the end of the conference day. So despite the fact I lived 2 years in Spain, so I know very well what is the importance of siesta. And we are far into siesta time, so my admiration goes even higher having in mind that. But just not to risk my my luck, with you being a bit less active in this part of the last part of the conference. The lesson that I learned as a lecturer from my professor a long time ago is that in the afternoon hours, if you want people to listen to you and pay attention, you have to be a moving target. So you have to move. If you are static, people will then start to nod a bit and, like sleep and nap and all this. But if you're moving, then you are attracting attention, which is something that Father Francis did very well. And he also knows about that trick. So I will be moving today a bit, and I will be asking you for a bit of cooperation and proactivity during this last presentation. Is that okay? Yes. So we will start with, well, philanthropy, of course. And now, this is not a shaming exercise, which I will ask you. So there is no need to feel embarrassed if you don't know the answer, because as few presenters today pointed out, this is a fast-changing word. And the terms and approaches change very fast. So there is no need to be ashamed if you don't know. I just am asking for your participation and honesty in your answers. So we all know what is philanthropy, right? So can I ask all of those who know the difference between philanthropy and charity to raise their hands? How many of you know the difference between philanthropy and charity? No one. Okay, don't be shy, or in Malaysian, don't be malu. Okay. So, how many of you know the difference between philanthropy and corporate philanthropy? Or similarities? Is this now siesta time? Or you're just shy in answering? What is the difference between philanthropy and corporative social responsibility? What is the difference between philanthropy and impact investing? No? Okay. Yes. The difference between philanthropy and social sustainability? What is philanthrocapitalism? We have few more terms, such as sponsorship, donations, fundraising, individual giving, crowdsourcing. Sounds familiar, right? And actually, when you look at this patchwork of different terms, which are now in use, and have been in use, some for a long time, some quite shortly, what is the common for all of them is philanthropy. But people, those who give and those who receive, usually those who give, often get confused among all this universe of different terms, appearing more rapidly as we developed, both economically and as societies. As we developed, when it comes to investing strategies, when it comes to new technologies, there will be more and more terms, which might be quite confusing, but can also be helpful if we learn what they mean and how we can use them. However, to get some clarity from this, and you will see now how it goes, we need to, when it comes to philanthropy, there are four main things, and I will go very quickly through them, just to make sure that the terms from the first slide are nicely grouped where they belong. So when it comes to philanthropy, we first have to answer a question, why? So why do we give? Of course, we know that philanthropy is love for humanity, and it aspires to improve quality of life of all humankind. But when it comes to giving, there are different reasons for giving, right? There is fathers are mentioned at the very beginning. Now I will just repeat quickly. There is a genuine need for giving. There are many altruists who just give from their heart, from their souls to those who are in need. They're emotional giving, so those who from any personal reason want to support some cause, either because there was some sickness in their family or in their community, or they were affected by the wars at previous times, now they want to help refugees. So very emotional reasons. A huge chunk of giving is guilt giving. Yeah. If there are parents here, you know that sometimes you also give to your kids because you don't have enough time to spend with them, so then you will give them some small gift. So guilt giving is also a big part of giving. Then there is a giving because you will receive some gains, and this especially goes to corporate foundations. They can get tax reduction, they can get different types of incentives. It's very good for their branding, because you know the giving and few photos, especially now with social media, where you can take selfies and put on Instagram, Twitter and all this, it looks good for what you want to bring. Then it's also status. Some gives because they want to show off, they want to show that they're wealthy enough to give. Fine. And then there is political giving, so some really have to give for political purposes in order to continue doing their jobs and developing their business. And then there is also obligatory. I will talk a bit more about that in next slides. So then we have what? What is it that those who give, philanthropists, support? And we heard about that today. There is different type of givings for health, education, poverty reduction, culture, sanitation, infrastructure, and list goes on. However, there is another group of thinking which is not always welcome by those who receive and who think that the philanthropic giving should go only to poverty reduction. There is another group that tells that actually it should go to medical research. It should go to innovation. It should go to technologies as well. Because if it hasn't been for philanthropic giving a long time ago to these kind of purposes, we wouldn't have vaccines, we wouldn't have X-ray, we wouldn't have many inventions that significantly improved quality of life of people, of all humankind. So there are two schools of thought of what should be supported by philanthropic giving. This is kind of summary. And then we have who, and on the who question, we do have two groups. Those who are giving, and they can be individuals, corporations, institutions, governments, they are giving, and those who are receiving. So those could be individuals, NGOs, faith-based organizations, grassroots organizations, charities, but also if we look at the medical research and innovations, there could be institutes, those could be innovation hubs, etc. And then we have how. How is the tool, is the instrument of giving, through what kind of mechanisms those who give. And then we do have, and Father Greg was telling about fundraising. This is one of the things that is not on the list, but the fundraising is way of how you collect and how you give as well. So then we have donations, sponsorships, in-kind, volunteering, grants, crowdsourcing, giving equipment, giving time, giving space, also investing, and we will be talking about that a bit later as well. So then when we have all this in mind, here it comes the question about responsibilities. And before I start with this, I'm quite sure that a number of you knows that when it comes to philanthropy, at this point of time, there is a huge negative trend and a lot of criticism towards corporate philanthropy. So my presentation from now onwards will be about corporate philanthropy. And the reason for these critiques, which were very openly discussed this year at the World Economic Forum, meaning that in Davos, meaning that they are not just minority opinion anymore. the Stanford Innovation Review, Social Innovation Review, the Harvard Business Review, they're all the Forbes. Many very renowned and acknowledged magazines and institutions are raising that issue and encouraging debate about the future of philanthropy, poses this question: who holds corporate philanthropists responsible for their giving, both when it comes to positive and negative impacts of those giving? And now we have a very interesting two kind of sides of this that provides the answer to this question. One is that follows this, that we should actually focus more on scrutiny instead of gratitude. And Bishop was talking about gratitude. I fully agree that we should be grateful for everything that we get in order to help and to improve quality of life of those who are in need. However, due to all these kind of things, which I will list now, there is a trend, ongoing increasing trend, that requires scrutiny for money that was given in philanthropy rather than gratitude. So scrutiny first, and then if they pass that test, then gratitude follows. And that test actually is because of these reasons. It's because big corporations, especially in the United States, no one holds them accountable for their givings. There is no transparency in whom they give, what they give for, and what are results. It's very donor-directed, meaning that if I want to give for some cause, I will give it regardless if there is really a need there or not. So there is a lot of overlapping as well. Many of those donations are ad hoc. Very short-term results come out of those philanthropic givings. There is no control. There is no monitoring by anyone. If they want to get tax incentives, which most of them want, they just have to fill in one form, and that's all. There are no required reporting about results. And because they give, and there are many names, such as Gates Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, Obama Foundation, etc., when they give, and they give a lot, they get tax subsidies, they get a lot of reputation building and brand building, and they get a huge power over some decisions, which might not be decisions that the public will mostly benefit from. So, for example, Gates Foundation gives a lot for vaccines, and there is the data that so far 8 million lives in Africa of kids were saved because of the vaccines that they received. Then there is also a huge number of projects that they are implementing in education system. However, because of that, they have a huge influence over development or approval of some policies that might not be the one that is beneficial for the rest of the population. And then they get tax subsidized. And because of all these issues, there is a growing feeling that is best described when it comes to corporate philanthropists that follow this scrutiny instead of gratitude, that is best described in Chinese proverb that says, when money speaks, truth is silent. Because of their giving, and because of the amount they give, the way they give, those who receive, and there was a question today asked by Glenda to Father, is what do we do if there is some conflict of either interest or our own beliefs? Do we receive how we give, or do we reject? Do we have a right to receive or reject? So there is a lot of discussion going on here. The second school of thought that would like to provide the answer to this question on who holds corporate philanthropists responsible would go after shared responsibility, saying that, yes, we do have corporate philanthropists who do all this on this right side, yours left side. However, we do have implementing partners. We do have charities, we do have non-governmental organizations, we do have churches and faith-based organizations who, if they see that something is wrong, something is not bringing results, something is short-term, ad hoc, and doesn't really help much, or if they see that the giving is there with a kind of another agenda on board, they can raise their voice. It's their responsibility as well to put a stop to some practice that they don't find moral or good enough for their final beneficiaries. Then there is also responsibility of beneficiaries who might voice out and say, well, this doesn't really solve the problem for us. In many cases, you will not see many of those who are receiving complaining about receiving, but it is their responsibility as well to voice out if something is not bringing longer-term solutions. And then finally, there are the governments who should provide a scope, who should provide different type of monitoring mechanisms, of incentives for meaningful giving. And one more reason for questioning currently going philanthropic activities is also lack of information about results. And this is the quote from one very wise Argentinian man who said, "I know what I have given to you, but I don't know what you have received." Because if you look at the annual reports of many corporations, I'm not going to say that your reports look the same because I didn't look at them, but I look at reports of many organizations. What you will see there is you will see how much money was given, how many scholarships was provided, how many medicine was provided, how many hygiene kits or firewood wood or whatever is the need in different parts of the world. You will see what is given. You will not see what is the impact. So talking about communication, and Father Francis pointed out very well, is when we are communicating, when you are communicating, the one part of communication is what you have received, because you are on receiving part. However, what you have done with that and what is the impact of the programs you were running quite often is not good enough, well enough communicated, both with those who are giving you money as well as the general public. So moving forward from this, talking about long-term impact, impact needs purpose and structure. So when it comes to purpose, and when it comes to philanthropy, there is no doubt of what purpose is. Philanthropy explains it on its own. One is the governance, and again, this is all related to corporate sector. However, it is all related to our own private life. Just follow what I'm telling you and you will see that it is quite applicable to everyday life and running of our families or our businesses and our lives. So the governance and economic is the company's impact on economic conditions of its stakeholders and on economic system of local, national, and global levels. And when it comes to governance as a first pillar of sustainable development, these issues are fairly covered by different programs which focus on fair trade, procurement, investment, suppliers. And actually for the corporate sector to meet these requirements is quite easy because it's directly linked to their core business, to the way how they make profit, to the way how they grow and develop. So they are very familiar with this pillar. The second one is environment. And in a bishop's presentation today, we heard about environmental protection. Also the father from the diver from high school, yes. You also mentioned environmental protection and how active you are. So environmental pillar of sustainable development focuses on companies' impact on living and non-living natural systems, including air, water, and ecosystem, all with the purpose to actually protect our environment and to actually improve quality of life of all of us in the planet. Just to give you So this pillar is moderately covered. It's becoming a mainstream slowly. 10 years ago, no one was really paying much attention on all these appeals and protests and you know, like different type of campaigns that were bringing up the question, raising the issue of environmental protection. Yet now, after so many years, it's becoming something that is accepted. And actually it focuses on energy, water use, waste, pollution, diversity. Just to let you know how important this pillar becomes, I will give you an example of the Catholic Church, but also first of the Norwegian Sovereign Fund, which is the pension fund, the biggest sovereign fund in the world, which actually values 195,000 euros per Norwegian citizen. It is that big. From 2012 to 2018, this institutional investor divested, meaning stop investing or pull out their funds from those investments that were not in line with environmental and social sustainability practices, meaning they took out their investments from everything that was harming nature or people. In case of the Catholic Church, last year, Catholic Church divested from 600 million euros, meaning that all those investments that were going into coal extraction and production, which is considered as a very dangerous for and degrading environment, the Catholic Church divested, sending a very strong message to, not just to Catholics around the world, but to the world itself, that they are on the path to conserve the natural resources in the sustainable way. And the last one, the one that I will focus mostly today, is actually social sustainability, and that is companies' impact on quality of life of their employees, supply chain, communities, and society as a whole. And this one is very neglected. Not rather, but very neglected. Why? Because corporates don't see the direct link between social sustainability and their core business. This is in a nutshell what is the main reason for neglect of this component. Yet social sustainability is everything that has to do with the people, either internally within the company. So it targets employees, so all topics related to labor, health, human rights, equal opportunities, trainings, diversity, supply chain, investments, legal, and it usually focuses on policies, processes, procedures, practices, etc., that are defining how company will react on some of these relevant issues. The second part are external practices, so outside of company, and they actually mirror implementation of these internal policies. They focus on supply chain and partners, and they focus on communities and society. So in mapping where philanthropy is in this scheme, in this division, when it comes to this part, this is the core strategic value of a corporation. So policies, processes, and all this is something that is the core of how organizations are functioning, corporates. Supply chain and partners are core business plus sectoral standards. And here is where philanthropy is. So philanthropy is within communities and societies where those corporations are actually implementing and doing their business. And to make it a bit more specific, so components of social sustainability, and I'm quite sure that you will see the similarities with philanthropic activities across different sectors and across different regions where you work, are fair labor practices, living conditions of people who live, not just employees, but people who live in that area. So as Glenda mentioned, the mining area, so this is the living conditions of those who are living in the mining area. What is the quality of air they breathe? Are they going to have more cancer cases because of pollution in that area, etc., etc. Health and safety, human rights, child labor and slavery is something that is not extinct. I will give you one example of how good intentions can really lead to hell for some. There is a huge a movement at the level of European Union to promote electric mobility. So electric mobility pollutes less, so air is cleaner for all of us. It doesn't require extraction of fuels and oils, so it uses batteries. Overall, it's good. I don't need to list. There are many benefits. So they were big promoters of introducing more electric mobility in Europe. What they actually didn't look at is what is needed for the battery. At the very beginning, they didn't look until it became a big scandal. What is needed for the battery to be produced, the battery that is used for these electric cars and vehicles. And then they realized that one of the key ingredients is cobalt. And cobalt is extracted in Africa, mostly in Congo, which has the biggest reserves. And there, kids age of 4 work for less than 10 cents per day. It's a child slavery for a fresh and clean air in Europe and the rest of the world. And it's part of supply chain. So when we talk about, and imagine how many kids are dying on daily or monthly basis because they are inhaling those poisonous foams and all this. So when it comes to those stakeholders who are involved in implementing social sustainability practices, they are employees, it's supply chain, partners, consumers, society. Part of that is, so those who were producing electrical cars were claiming that their practices are fully sustainable because they're environmentally friendly, they follow all ISO standards and all this. However, what is proven by many research is that when it comes to unsustainable practices, in 80 to 90% of them, those unsustainable practices come from supply chain. And here it goes, the risk for your reputation, financial loss, etc., etc. Another example of how things related to social sustainability, if they are not addressed properly, can really lead to disaster, is something that you maybe know. It's Rama Plaza in Bangladesh, 2013. There was a roof in the factory that collapsed and killed 500 people, workers in Bangladesh. Due to health and safety reasons, which were obviously far from any basic standards, 500 people died. And you know for whom they were producing the garments? For H&M. So in Sweden, H&M, which is their home country, follows and meets all requirements related to sustainable practices. They even have a cotton naturally produced and all this. Yet, their working force in Bangladesh that was producing all those organic cotton and all this was working in inhuman conditions, which actually led to 500 dead people. So I'm telling you all this just to make you the link between their good intentions to maybe give in philanthropic projects with a disastrous results in some of cases, which I think we should all have in mind, also those who are receiving, is on what is the best way to really improve quality of life of people. Because there is more and more trends and voices that are advocating for don't give in philanthropic purposes, pay taxes. Because if you, and this is in the United States, I'm not saying it will come in Asia, and it will definitely not come in countries that have slightly or heavily corrupted governments, because if you invite them to pay taxes, that money that will go to the government can be corrupted as well. So this is not the case here. But in states, they are saying big corporations pay taxes Because if you pay taxes, then the money will definitely be directed to those that are really in need. And not just that you pay taxes, you should also incorporate philanthropic, core of philanthropic mission, which is incorporate goodness in all these parts of what you are doing. And then all these people here will benefit from it, poor as well, but the rest of the people and communities as well. And then when it comes to sectors involved, these are the sectors within the one company that actually are relevant for implementation of social sustainability practices. So it comes from business development, investments, legal, marketing, operations, and all these processes, procedures, and policies should be incorporated in order to really bring a good. So, national and global pressure on corporate sector to actually start introducing these practices into their everyday operations are on different levels. So you have National Stock Exchange in Philippines as well. We know that in Singapore they have already regulations related to sustainable practices. In Malaysia there is Bursa Malaysia. In Philippines you have your own stock exchange, which is the part of the bigger international stock exchange network, which are starting to impose these requirements for corporate sector. You have sovereign funds on the international level, different UN, IMF, World Bank, International Labor Organization, different type of organizations are putting, and investors as well, activists, are putting more and more pressure on corporations to meaningfully implement their programs. So don't just run after your profit. Look around yourself, look at the communities, look at your employees first, those who are bringing you profit and earning you that profit. Look at the communities in which you work, look at the society in which you operate and influence, and start practicing good practices. Start practicing good, not just good for your own business, but good for others. So this is the pressure that they are putting on, and it is actually recognized by institutional investors, those who want to invest in long-term positive change, such as the social responsibility investing, such as the ESG, environmental social governance investing, then mission-driven investing, then impact investing. All these different types of investing are using criteria from these three: economic, environmental, and social sustainability pillars to assess whether they want to, in future, invest money in some business or not. And the lack of knowledge, understanding, and implementation of these practices is already identified as the biggest corporate vulnerability in years to come. We mentioned today a few times, I think, few of you, is that with millennials and with next generation, which is more environmentally and socially conscious than previous one, in next 5 to 7 years, 30%, 35% of the capital in Asia will change hands to a younger generation. Meaning that business as usual, having my first topic and my first aim is to earn profit, and then I will think about the rest. The way how I earn the profit is not so important, and then I will think about the rest, about the peace and love in the world, etc., is not going to take place anymore. There will be more and more scrutiny on how they are giving, and that scrutiny will actually be imposed by those who are now millennials and who will be in years to come actually take over most of this existing capital these days. So the reason that something that follows this, national and international pressure on corporate sector could be very well described in one sentence, which is the sentence from American engineer and statistician. I was at the conference in Barcelona where he shared this with us, or one of his disciplines shared it with us. And it's the moment for me today to mention God, because all of you already did that. It is in God we trust, everyone else brings data. So it is coming a time where just claiming that you did something would not be enough. You will have to measure it. You will have to prove it. You will have to show it in order to get. And this actually applies to all of you. You will have, in order to fundraise more, in order to get more philanthropic giving, you will have to apply this as well. I know that Sister Bienvenida, if I'm right, said that you were always keeping receipts and all this. That's good. That's how you spend the money. But the data is also on what you did with that money. Not you. I'm just saying in general. So the request for data will be more and more. And to confirm this, these are the trends. That 2016 research identified almost 400 sustainability reporting instruments in 64 countries. 2/3 of these instruments are mandatory. Almost 1/3 of reporting instruments apply exclusively to large, but from 2020 instruments will be applied to those who are medium listed companies. So more and more measurement requirements will be developed. And this is 2016. Imagine now it's 2019. I'm quite sure this number, if not doubled, then it's close. And the growth of reporting instruments in Europe, Asia Pacific, and Latin America has been among those who are particularly strong. So instead of just talking about what are requirements, here are some of the benefits for corporations that you might approach in future on how their business can benefit from integrating philanthropy into their social sustainability practices. So this is all result of experience and research done by different organizations saying that if you are focusing on social sustainability and implementing those practices, as a corporation, you will definitely improve productivity and employees' engagement. And I will just give you one brief example of the research done. It is actually annual research worldwide, but the first data that was strikingly shocking was the one from UK in 2013. And that research was actually looking at the employees' productivity and the reasons for lack of productivity. And it showed that over 60% of employees were depressed in their working environment. The reason for it was bad leadership, so they didn't believe their leaders. They didn't believe in the good that their companies were doing. And they simply didn't see the future vision of how they can help not just produce profit, but also help society. They stayed at those jobs because they have to meet ends and earn something, but 30% of them were highly depressed. Over 70% of them were admittedly unproductive, either spending their time by looking busy doing nothing, or stabbing their co-workers in the back. So, you know, like gossiping and other type of beautiful chatting. So that costed UK economy in 2013, by some estimation, 106 billion pounds. That lack of unproductivity. And all reasons that I listed for lack of productivity were part of social sustainability, because everything starts and ends with the people. Coming to Asia, this is the data from last year, and unfortunately I have just data for Malaysia and Singapore, sorry not to have for Philippines, but in Malaysia, only 17% of employees are productive. In Singapore is 19, so they're winning for 2 points. But globally, lack of productivity cost the world in 2018 $7.2 trillion per year. And those reasons for lack of productivity, and that's why I put it first, are coming from lack of belief in what their corporations are doing, in bad leadership and many processes and procedures, and in just, you know, like looking busy doing nothing because they don't have another option. If they would have it, they would leave. The second is unlocking new markets. So once when you are pressed to search for sustainable practices, then innovation takes place. Then you will look at other streams of income, potential income, and how you can open up other markets. Helping retain and attract new partners because of your sustainable practices, becoming source of innovation and new products, improving risk management, reputation building, etc., etc. So there are many, many, many examples of how corporations benefited. And I think your role and your responsibility is to learn more about these practices, positive practices. So when you approach potential corporate philanthropists, you might help them understand how they can benefit from giving you. Because in many cases, and I spent 20 plus years working on a donor side, I was never on the side of those who are asking for money. I was always and have been on the side of those who are giving money. Those who give money quite often feel, and don't mind my expression now, because this is very authentic, as a milking cows. They just give, endlessly give. You cannot imagine what is the list, and you might be just one on the list of hundreds who ask for this, that. Be the one, learn your homework, learn how they can benefit from you, and be the one who will reverse that approach, who will give them something, and then they will see the benefit of helping you. The father, I forgot the name, I'm sorry, but you said that you were going from one alumni to another and just telling them what are you doing, and then they were coming back to you. This is the same. Go and tell them how their business can be improved. They will come back to you and ask you to help them to improve by giving you money. But they have to see the benefit. It is in the core of corporate sector to search for a benefit. So it is your responsibility, I will come later to that, to learn more on how you can help them, not just how they can help you. So steps towards the social sustainability practices for corporate sector. I will just quickly go through this because it is very specific. This is what my company does, so it really requires the specific knowledge and expertise in these areas. So it requires assessment of adequacy and relevance of their existing programs of giving. Quite often they will realize that actually what they were giving might not be so relevant, and that therefore there were not so big impact of their work. Then matching existing giving programs against social sustainability requirements. So when they give, and when they give for philanthropic reasons in my country, we say the right hand gives, left hand doesn't know where it gives and to whom it gives. Which is a good thing, because that means the giving is genuine. But if you help them understand how they can incorporate the philanthropic giving that they give to you into their social sustainability practices, that they will have to report quite soon. They will have to report to either their stock exchange or Ministry of Finance, or if they ask for tax incentives, they will soon, if not already, have to report about it. Help them. Learn how to help them to properly report and properly incorporate their philanthropic programs and budgets into their social sustainable practices, which is number 3. And then setting relevant data tracking, again, in God we trust. the rest brings data. So you have to have data not just on, and this is one of the mistakes of many of those who are receiving money. You track, if you do track, and not you, but organizations, if they do track, they track until that project ends. So they track on a very short-term basis. Usually they don't track what happens 1 year after with that family that received funds. How that family actually, how you help lift up that family from about below the poverty line. If you would have that data, that would help you a lot in reaching out to new donors and to new organizations who will give you money, because you will have a track record of impact. You will not have a track record of what you implemented, but what you achieved. Because at the end of the project cycle of 1 year, of 6 months, you are able to report only about what you delivered, not what is the result of that delivery. So tracking data and mechanisms in place are very, very important for long-term funding. And then this is related to reporting. Again, coming back to responsibilities, and I think this is something that is very important, especially in this kind of settings and this kind of audience. We often put responsibility, I'm not saying you, I think that's in human nature, in all of us, we often put the responsibilities to someone else, like, oh, I didn't fundraise enough money, well, it's up to them and their policy and lack of their budget, etc., etc. They are actually in implementing and achieving social sustainability practices, we are all responsible. So on the corporate philanthropy side, implementing partners, which are you, beneficiaries, and governments, they all hold responsibility for implementing sustainable practices. How? Well, corporates, by incorporating social sustainability principles in their core business and operations. Implementing partners, which is you, is learning about social sustainability requirements and helping corporates to understand how your program is helping them meet these requirements. It's not a rocket science. It requires a bit of expertise and a bit of training, but it's not something that is hard to learn. And it is your responsibility not to get short-term ad hoc donations. That will continue to happen. I'm quite sure you're so skilled to get that. But to get a long-lasting funding that lead to long-lasting results, well, that requires the change in approach. And then beneficiaries have to be proactive, and I hope you also teach your beneficiaries this. They have to be proactive in searching for and taking part in finding and implementing long-term solutions for themselves. This is fish, giving fish and learning how to fish. So you have to ignite that proactivity in themselves, because many countries in which I worked and lived, Malaysia is one of them to some extent, they do, and these kind of philanthropic programs, they produce professional beneficiaries. They produce professional dependents on philanthropic aid. People who are good enough with as small as they can get, not so much earn. It is their responsibility and yours as well to help them become more proactive in searching for solutions and not just waiting for help. And then governments that can create and enable regulatory frameworks that support and incentivize social sustainability practices. So this, I was talking a lot about social sustainability. This is something that would be a not official definition, but the definition I really like, which is social sustainability and its focus on quality of life of people. Remember what philanthropy is improving quality of life of people, is the necessary cogwheel of sustainable investment in our future, because everything starts and ends with people. It starts and ends with their values, beliefs, knowledge, understanding how they communicate, how they cooperate, how they live and grow. That's what social sustainability is. And I will end this presentation with 10 rules of social sustainability, and I'm quite sure that you will be able to directly link them to some rules of philanthropy. So for corporates who implement social sustainability practices, it is not about your business, it is about people and communities your business affects and depends on. It is not about amount of your support that you give to us, it is about continuity of your support. It is not about short-term fixes, it is about long-term solutions. It is not about doing things alone, it is about partnerships and collaboration. It is not always about additional resources, but it is how you use those that you already have. You see the similarities with philanthropy? It's very similar. It is up to you to learn how to present this to corporates so that they can see direct link and their benefit from actually introducing social sustainability practices. It is not only about knowing and understanding, it is about caring, because knowing and understanding have to do with the mind, and caring has to do with the heart. And your work is both. It has to be both. It cannot be just heart. It cannot be just mind. You have to persuade both. It is not about giving only, it is about meaningful giving. It is not about reducing business risks, it is about increasing quality of life. It is not about requirements and compliance, it is about values and trust. And as I said a few times, everything starts and ends with. I think this is the end. And caring about that is the essence of any business and any society. So I think we are here today. You hear me? And I really applaud those who came up with the topic of this conference, is because like anything else in this fast-moving world, philanthropy also needs to change its approaches. It needs innovation, because change is inevitable. It will happen. It is happening. It is happening in every sphere of our life. But progress is optional. So I will leave you with this. This is the end, something, the food for thought. And thank you a lot. There will be Q&A, right?